So this weekend I was playing around with the OpenAI ChatGPT program. This is a new website tool that utilizes artificial intelligence to answer a whole slew of questions, anything from cooking recipes, English writing assignments, to writing complex source code. That last part is what I'm going to focus on in this video. The neat thing about the algorithm is that you can ask it a question and simply follow it up with a simple phrase. For example, you could ask it to write a story about a butterfly and a bee, and then follow it up with something like, make it longer, or add an emotion to the story without restating the first question. It's really amazing what they have done. So far, there have been over 1 million signups in the first week or two of its release. It's fairly easy to create an account. Just head over to the OpenAI website and click the link. Once you are in, you can type in your question and it will do its best to answer. It's not perfect, but you'll see what I mean. I thought it would be interesting to see how the chatbot would handle Commodore Basic and assembly language questions. In this video, I'm having fun with experimenting around with the chatbot, and I sped up the video more than 3 times in order to save viewing time. I apologize if it goes a little too quickly in sections. I do slow down most of the results to play in real time. Alright, so as you can see, the video is sped up times 3 and sometimes times 7 in some places. Here I've asked Chatbot GPT to create a Hello World program and in assembly language. And it did so, and then I'm porting it into Kick Assembler with VS Code. I had to make a few changes to the program initially because it wouldn't run as is. I thought this would be a good way to test out the chatbot and to initiate it. And there it did. It ran the program. It ran fine. But then I was like, hey, let's try doing the command, change the background color to red. And so then it comes out and spews this information here, which was incorrect because it uses 0D. And that is not, in fact, red. When it runs, you'll see. So I decided to go ahead and try some of its suggestions and run it, and it made the border green. So here I just said, hey, make the program smaller, make it more succinct. And then it goes ahead and it actually, in fact, did make a better version of the program, which is what I thought it should have done in the beginning at the very first attempt. And so I'm like, hey, this is pretty neat. Let's try to see if it can make a text scroller. So I was trying to ask it to draw a text scroller. And you have to be really careful how you pose the question to the chatbot. If you don't ask it just right, it may not interpret what you're asking correctly. And even if it does correctly interpret your question, it doesn't always produce the right answer. And so in this case, the code that it generates, I had to tweak it a little, but it doesn't really do a scroller. It just kind of slowly prints the text from left to right, I think. And I was like, not really what I want. So I'll say, hey, let's make it smooth scroll. And so it adds some raster delay or something in there, and it didn't quite work right, but it did, if I tweaked it a little, it did slow it down. So I thought that was interesting. I did have to tweak it to make it run initially. You see it slowly printed Hello World. If I do it over, I'll show you. It kind of runs quick. It's still very fast, but it kind of goes from left to right kind of slowly. Then I jump ahead and I had tried a few things in between here, and I said, hey, let's create a guessing game between 1 and 100, and let's see if it can just kind of generate a whole game. And what the thing is that I noticed with the chatbot, if its result is more than a minute, it errors out. So you have to ask it very succinct questions. Here I say, okay, it was using an else statement in BASIC, and I say, well, generate the same code but without the else statement, because that doesn't work in Commodore Basic, at least in my version of Commodore Basic on the 64. And so I'm still playing around with the code to try to get it to work. And then in this case here, I had an error, and you can kind of see me troubleshooting. So it enters this command to randomize timer, and I don't think that exists on the Commodore 64. And then I take that out and it runs. And then I realize, oh, I have to guess the exact number, otherwise try again. And like, this will take forever. So let's modify the chatbot to give us some hints. And then give the option to quit. It had a problem with the option to quit because it wasn't a number. There was an issue with it being a number versus a character that was being input. But I was quickly able to fix that. Yeah, and so it doesn't create the exact perfect code the first try. I had to change it up a little. But it was close. It was almost got it. It almost nailed it. But then when I made a few tweaks, I was able to get the program to run correctly. And I thought this was really interesting. That I've never seen anything like this on the internet before. That you could ask a question and then have the internet or the program on the other side, the server, the AI, generate the code for you. So far I'm really enjoying playing around with the chatbot. So I said, let's ask it some more questions. So I wondered if I could make a hangman game. And I think it was a little too ambitious. But it did give it the old college tries. It did try. But I didn't like the tact it was taking, and I think I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the hangman game because I couldn't get it to execute the code properly, and I think I moved on fairly quickly to another question. I asked it, do you know Vision Basic? I was wondering if it could write Vision Basic, and the answer it gave, I thought sort of indicated, yeah, I know Vision Basic. But then when I asked it to create, I did ask it to create a program in Vision, but I might show that later, but it didn't look like Vision Basic to me. So here instead, I asked it to write a program that draws random characters. Now this is the first program that really seemed, with a few tweaks, it actually was able to do what I was asking. And you can see at first it didn't run, but it had to have a few more tweaks. So you can go back to it and say, hey, that program didn't work. Try again and see what it comes up with. And then what I noticed when you really look at that code, if you look at line 120, there's a for loop, but then within the for loop, there was a goto that was exiting the for loop. So I had to say, hey, remove that goto that's contained in the for loop. And then it regenerated the code. And once it did that, that's when it started working. I'm not sure why I would have to tell it to do that. It just structured it weird at the beginning for some reason. And I told it to remove that and eliminate the locate statement. And then once I pasted that code in, it actually ran as intended. That's what I wanted it to do. The only thing I was like, oh, maybe on the next version I can just say, change the colors that are drawn. And so that's what I do on my next question. So I said to use only 2 character variable names and then change the color of each character drawn. Because for some reason it was using very descriptive variables and that was causing some problems. So once I did that and then reran it, it did exactly what I asked. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is one of the few times where it actually sort of ran well, this time the hello world. But a lot of the times, most of the other times when I ask it to do something, it doesn't really understand well enough. You could say that's my fault. Maybe I'm not asking the right questions. So here I was trying to say, write a program that displays the word Gray Defender in 10 lines. I didn't mean in 10 lines of code, but I meant like 10 rows of data. And the code here that's generating was perplexing to me. I don't know why it was trying to, the way it was trying to generate to write out my channel name. I didn't understand. It didn't seem very succinct. But I did play around with this for a little while and tried to get it to execute, but there was some weird code in there and that I just would strip out just to see if I could get it to do something. And finally I got it to run. It just printed one line, but it did print something. So then I went on, hey, do a PETSCII dinosaur. I wonder if it understood what the word PETSCII was. And then, so it generated this weird code with all those commands. And then that was the output. That does not look like PETSCII, and it does not look like a dinosaur. So I played around with that for a while, and then I said, let's try to create a spaceship sprite. Let's see if we can make a sprite. I said, that should be an easy thing for this thing to do. And so it gives me instructions, and then it looked promising here. It's drawing some data commands. But then the source code that it outputs, for some reason, it's only reading in the first 8 bytes. There's no way it's going to display the entire sprite if it's only reading in the first 8 bytes. And then that last segment up there, it looks completely inaccurate because that's not how you move a sprite around. I thought I would give it a shot and let it generate the code. And it was given it to me in little chunks, but so I had to ask it to put it all together in one program for me, please. And I do like this chatbot. You can hit the copy code on the top right, and then just paste that code into your emulator or into your program that you're using to run BASIC. I was using CVM Program Studio, the latest version, 4.0. So instead of running and moving a sprite, all this thing did was changed the border color in a loop, which was weird. And it had a do loop, and like this thing doesn't really understand Commodore BASIC very well. It's mixing up different languages. I bet it understands other languages. I've seen other people have success, like in Python. So then I said, let's see if it can generate a sound effect. And so I set off on a little journey here to see if it would generate some sound. So then it uses the sound command, which does not exist on the Commodore 64 and the volume command. But it does, I think, on the Commodore 128. So I had to kind of tell it, hey, this doesn't work on the Commodore 64. Can you please do it a different way with poke commands? So I don't think it really understands how to generate audio or sound, or at least it didn't do it in with my question. So, but I did try to take the code that it generated and execute it, but when it runs, I didn't turn the audio on for this part, but when it ran, it didn't make any sound at all. So I kind of gave up on the whole audio part and said, okay. See if we can draw a box. Draw a 10 by 10 box. And it kind of did that. It generated some code. It didn't do it what I was expecting, the way I was expecting. It was the void of a box. Like it drew the characters in the inside of the box. There was a hole that looked like a square right there. But I was like, okay, I'll give it credit. It went beyond the 25 characters that's allowed vertically. So then I decided to go ahead and try to see if I can get it to generate a spiral. Because we had this programming challenge a few years back to draw a spiral, and I was just like, I wonder if I can get it to draw a spiral. So I wanted to try to have it analyze the code and see if I could it could do a better job of writing BASIC than I could if I gave it the code initially. But I played around with this, and the bottom line was negative. in some cases you might be able to get it to work, but for what it did for me, most of the time it either made the program bigger, and sometimes it wouldn't run and would have errors. And so I tell it, hey, your program crashed it. So, oh, I apologize, let me redo it. Which is amazing. I'm like, oh, okay. Let's see if it actually does something. So you go ahead and you try it out again. But then when you look at the code, either it's the exact same code you had initially, or there's very little change to it, and it's either, in some cases, like I said, it's bigger than the original. So here I decided, hey, can you completely rewrite the program your way? And it said, oh, well, I don't know the intended purpose, so I can't do that. So I thought I would say, okay, if you don't know the intended purpose, I'll tell you what the purpose is. I've tried to tell it. The intended purpose is to have the program output be in the shape of a spiral. That might be too simplistic for it. But it did try to generate code here, and I thought, oh, okay, I know that's not going to draw a spiral straight off, but let's see what that does. So I went ahead and pasted it into CBM Program Studio, and of course it's just drawing A's on the screen repeatedly. It's like, okay. So maybe if I tell the chatbot, maybe if I tell it it's doing it, it's not doing what I asked. So hey, this program simply fills the screen with the letter A and does not display a spiral. And then it comes back with, okay, sorry about that. I can fix that for you. Let's try this code here. So I was like, you know what? That looks similar to code that generates a spiral. But then when I try to run it, it just drew a line. It started to kind of like go up, but then it stopped. I'm like, okay, I think with some tweaks that might have been able to work. I see it had a for statement for I equal 1 to 24. But I thought maybe if I go ahead and change that, maybe up the I value a little to see if it would see if I don't want to completely debug the entire chatbot's program, so I would just try some minor tweaks, but that didn't work. It just kind of generated code there in the corner. So I decided, I downloaded another user's code that's like 3 lines that does a spiral. And I said, hey, analyze this and maybe see if you can make a better version of it. So it was like, sure, here's a shorter version. It's 10 lines of code and it's much longer. And then not only that, here I was showing the original. So this is the 3 lines of code to generate a spiral. And it's very fast for basic. It runs and generates a spiral. Very ingeniously written. And then after I showed that, I copied and pasted here and put its version that it said is going to be the improved version of that. But it had that sys command at the beginning it didn't need, and then it still didn't function. So I asked it, why do you have a sys command in line 0? What's it supposed to do? And it came back, was like, here's what a sys command is, what it does. I was like, I know what a sys command is, but why do you have it on line 0? So I was like, you're right. The sys command in line 0 does not serve any purpose in the program you provided. I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't provide it, you rewrote it. So it kind of got confused on his answer there at the end. So anyway, that was my journey with the chatbot GPT. I'm having a lot of fun with it, but it needs a lot of work if I'm ever to use it going forward for any real purpose. I'm thinking like a version 2.0 or 3.0. It's still fascinating to play around with. I did enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thanks for watching.